Thalidomide was manufactured by the German pharmaceutical business Chemie Grunenthal. Thalidomide was patented in 1954 and released into the German markets as a tranquilizer on October 1, 1957. Thalidomide reeled in an immense mass of consumers when word was spread about it being extraordinarily able to decrease insomnia and common cold symptoms. In some countries, it was essentially comparable to aspirin in how often it was used, and since it was discovered to assuage morning sickness in expectant mothers, it was especially prescribed to pregnant women in many different countries including Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Austria. Because of its outstanding effects, thalidomide was designated as the wonder drug. Thalidomide may have satisfied scores of consumers worldwide, however. The wonder drug was found to have inimical effects. In 1961, Australian doctor William McBride reported the dramatic rise of infants who suffered malformations and said that these infants were born to women that had, during their pregnancies, used thalidomide in order to ease their morning sicknesses. That same year, after the announcement of the tragic births, the business of thalidomide had been ceased. Due to the drug, babies were born with a range of birth defects. The deformities of thalidomide-poisoned infants were overwhelmingly staggering. Swarms of infants were born with underdeveloped arms and legs, which happened to be the worst common injury sustained by surviving babies. Other babies were born harmed in areas that could include their cardiovascular system, digestive system, nervous system, etc. Lamentably, thousands of infants did not survive the impact of thalidomide. The wonder drug went wrong. Many surviving victims were accepted by their families, regardless of the appearance of their conditions or how cumbersome it was to care for them. Other victims were not as fortunate. On Tuesday, November 5, 1962, Suzanne van de Putte and Jean van de Putte were tried for administering barbiturates to their thalidomide-poisoned daughter, Karin, who had been born without arms. Suzanne stated, "If only my baby had also been mentally abnormal, it would have been different. She would not have realized what her fate was, but she had a normal brain. She would have realized. She would have known. I would have had remorse all my life. There was nothing else I could have done." Her bias was that what she had done to Karin was morally acceptable and just. "When I was born, my mother heard the nurse gasp," said Gary Grayson, a survivor of thalidomide poisoning. Grayson also explained that when he was in school, his fellow students would taunt him about his physical condition of having amputated legs as a result of the damage caused by the drug. Thalidomide victims tend to spend more in order to live. Their homes must have features that enable them to move from place, to eat, and to aid them in performing other daily tasks. Thalidomide survivors also have to purchase the service of a caretaker, in some cases. This is unfair to them, on top of being born with underdeveloped limbs due to Grunenthal's drug. Scientists developed artificial body parts for thalidomide sufferers, as well as other mechanisms to aid them in their daily tasks. Many of these devices would be terribly discommodious for victims, especially children. The prosthetics would weigh down users and be difficult to continuously handle. Also, these limbs would often be nothing short of ridiculous looking. The responsibility of simplifying the lives of those affected by thalidomide did not belong to the scientists who made these devices. It belonged to the manufacturer of the drug, Chemie Grunenthal. Grunenthal displayed a frustrating amount of hesitation on the severe predicament. This hesitation lasted for 50 years. During this time, thalidomide victims and their advocates took to the streets to protest the unjust actions of the German firm. Grunenthal did not admit that the drug was a blunder on its part, nor did it distribute money as a way to redress its faults. Grunenthal was also under fire for insufficiently testing the drug. In London, protesters demanded compensation for the traumatic consequences of Distaval, one of the British trademarks for thalidomide. Nicholas Dobrik, the chairman of the National Advisory Council to the Thalidomide Trust, described Grunenthal's actions as gross negligence. Gary Skinner, a thalidomide victim residing in the United Kingdom, announced he would begin his hunger strike along with his mother Frances, who had consumed thalidomide during her pregnancy, in efforts to convince the government to surrender compensation for their suffering. Grunenthal finally brought up the thalidomide incidents and issued an apology on August 31, 2012. The 50-year delay tarnished the image of Grunenthal even more since its discovery of the horrors of the thalidomide drug.
Manufacturer, German pharmaceutical giant Grunenthal, still flatly refuses to pay any compensation or even to admit liability.
Grunenthal attempted to justify its greatly postponed apology by saying that the delay was a result of the shock that the thalidomide victims had put Grunenthal through.
They don't have a right to be shocked. The shock doesn't belong to them.
This, obviously, was not convincing survivors. The vast majority of survivors desired monetary aid as an apology.
Every day and cope with the incredible damage that Grunenthal did to Lynn and our family.
What was found to be lacking in the Grunenthal apology was the admittance of fault by the company. Grunenthal created a statue of a person affected by thalidomide, but victims were unimpressed. What Grunenthal had done was unacceptable. It was unacceptable to those who had to undergo severe misery due to their underdeveloped limbs, and it was also unfair to the families of the victims. It is also inexcusable and selfish to the infants and fetuses who never had the opportunity to live. The painful impact that this must have had on the families of the deceased babies is unfathomable. A legitimate apology was the absolute least the German firm could provide from this utter tragedy. Along with protests to Grunenthal, thalidomide victims were turning to their national governments to receive compensation for the thalidomide disaster. United Kingdom thalidomide victims were delivered an apology from Mike O'Brien, the health minister, and also received monetary compensation of $1 million. Kemi Grunenthal eventually succumbed and finally paid compensation in 2012 to a number of German victims. It still has many other survivors to pay. In Australia and New Zealand, during February of 2014, thalidomide victims earned an $89 million benefit for their convenience. These victims included Lynette Rowe, a woman born lacking arms and legs. The drug company Diageo acknowledged that it was accountable for the thalidomide victims by contributing aid. Thalidomide today is exclusive even when prescribed, and only prescribed to those who suffer from leprosy as well as bone marrow cancer. They have warning labels to indicate that pregnant women cannot administer the drug to themselves. The thalidomide victims, who today are mostly in their 50s, will march on, united with one another. They have endured together and will continue to endure together. They will stand solid, with a voice more powerful than every pill of thalidomide ever manufactured, for those who were robbed of their voices.